Hey everybody, and we are teaching Tilt Brush. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be looking today at playing with atmosphere and spooky dark atmospherics and that kind of thing. You'll notice in Tilt Brush, it's really easy to do our bright lights, bright colors, yeah, I get it, that type of thing. But we also would like to do these darker, moody paintings, something coming out of the fog, a ship coming out of the fog, or a castle on a mountaintop, that type of thing. And it's actually rather difficult to do in Tilt Brush. Since Tilt Brush we're painting basically with light, it's easy to paint bright things, light colors, glowing objects, but it's actually very difficult to do the darker things, to hide stuff, to do shadow where you want. Even things like the smoke tool is made out of light, so even if I choose the darkest black I can get, when I paint with the smoke, it's still a glowing blue. The more I paint, it's kind of hard to see against that background, but you can see it just becomes a blue glow, not an obscuring fog, not a dark smoke. So we're going to look at some ways at how we could do that. So if I want our Tiltosaurus friend here to be looming out of the smoke like a horrible monster on a horror movie, how could we do that? Some of the things, of course, is going to be the setting. So our environment, the actual light itself is going to have a big impact. But we can also use the paint to hide and obscure. So if I want him looming out of the fog, how can I have the body fade away into the rest of the painting? And that's the kind of thing we're looking at today in teaching Tilt Brush. So let me get rid of this smoke, and we're going to take our Tiltosaurus friend here. It's a model, so I can actually grab it and move it around and change its size and stuff like that. So I'm going to have it as a big monster sort of looming out of the background like that. Now in this case, it's kind of hard to have him coming out of smoke. I'm in the all-white environment. So really, if I was going to be doing this as a scary thing, I might choose an environment like the night environment. That's already fairly dark. We can see more clearly where the light is coming from. In the paler environments, even if I went into something like the pedestal or something like that, there's a little more light going on. We can still see what's going on here. So the environment you're in is going to have a big impact on how we're going to be able to hide this guy. If I wanted it a sunny day in the fog, this environment's not a bad setting as the entire world fades into this blank fog. So how could I have my Tiltosaurus friend here be looming out of a fog? If it's a light environment, then things like the smoke isn't bad because it is building up in light. So if I keep it a dark color and I grab my smoke, I'm actually going to get very big and make my brush very big. So I could do a cloud of smoke in just one or two strokes. So here it is pale. You can see with a blue, even at black levels, the blue smoke shows up as blue. So rather than keeping it a bright color, undo, I'm going to go in the center. So it's a dark gray, no tint to it at all. If I'm in square mode, get all the way to the edge. So you're in the gray area and we're not adding color, we're just adding obscuring smoke. I still want as little value as possible, so I'm going to keep the color as black as possible. I'm going to get in close, so if you see how I paint smoke in front of him, as I paint more smoke, it's building up that light. It's starting to hide it in. And if I just paint like that a lot, you can see now there's enough smoke, it's actually starting to hide the body. And if this was the large painting, now it's getting a little more of an atmosphere. Let's even add some more in here. You can see just the more smoke I paint starts to obscure. I can do a little breath coming out here, but it does take a lot. If I have it at a brighter color, it will work faster, but it's a harsher glow. You can actually see it. So maybe a few streamers of that coming in from the sides, coming out of his mouth, maybe some nose streamers type of thing. If I get larger, the larger brush lets me do a larger belt of smoke at once. Again, this case, I don't want to do it too sharp, so I'm going to go back to the darker color. So when I paint, it's not quite as obvious. You can see it's not quite as obvious. It's still there, but it's much fainter. Let me get back in center here. So if I'm going in a light background, fog effects are much easier to achieve simply because adding more light is helping to obscure it. So now we've got something looming out of the fog a little more effectively. Who would have thought Tiltosaurus could be spooky? So it is in some ways a lot of work, but that way I get the softest blend, the softest change. In the brighter environments, light additive tools can give us that effect. In this case, it's still kind of obvious where the glow is, so I may need to extend my smoke off to either side to make it a bigger field, more environmental. Or when I go back to human scale, with a giant creature behind me, now we can see it's got a lot more of that fog realistic smoke effect. Smoke is easy for that. And if we're just adding on top of pale colors, smoke does that most easily. The coarse bristle brush is another way to achieve a similar effect. Let me erase all that smoke for a moment. And a similar effect can be achieved with the coarse bristles. Now we do need to match the background color a little more precisely. Whoops, come back here. So I don't want it true white. I want it just a little off-white. Now I'm going to go in, I'm going to make my Tiltosaurus friend very large and far away. So let me get up to a real size here. Expand this guy. Just so we have a good model to work with here. Now with a coarse bristle brush, because the bristles themselves are separated, we're not making a solid line. I'm actually going to be making pattern like that. At first, it's very obvious where those patterns are, especially depending on how well you match the background color. But you can see how we can build it up to make it thicker and hide more effectively as we go. Combining this with our fog effects and things is how we're going to start being able to hide these shapes against the darker backgrounds as well. With the lighter backgrounds, smoke is an easy, obvious way. Just use the darker colors of the smoke so it's not too overwhelming all at once. The darker the color of smoke, the more subtle it's going to be. So I'm going to take this effect and add the dark color smoke, and it will fade out a lot more quickly and easily. So my color of smoke is almost black, going for the larger size, and it just sort of acts as a way to blend it all together. It smoothly starts to hide. On your screen, it's a little more vibrant, but as we start working with it, it just becomes ways of blending colors together, hiding the shadows and lines. And while that might be effective for the paler colors, really what we'd like to try to do is make this a more eerie scene, a night scene maybe, castle on a hilltop, monster coming out of the fog type of thing. So I'm actually going to switch to the environment of a darker environment. I'm going to choose the standard night sky. It's got a horizon line. It's also got a lovely star sky already in here, so I can give this a real world setting. Let's get back to human size and starting location. And let's get rid of all these pieces so we can start with just our main guy here. So here's our giant monster. Let me work with you here. And I'm going to set him back a little bit. I've got my floor right here, so when I'm standing on the floor, we should see him in the background behind me. Okay, so what I'd like to have is him coming out of the smoke at me. And this is tougher to do in the dark, because even if I choose the blackest black of color and choose my smoke, you can see it actually adds light. It's not a dark, obscuring smoke. It's almost a glowing fog all of its own, which makes it hard to really have a monster invisible in the dark, because it really does just sort of have it in its own glowing cloud. And that's not what we're trying for. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of my failed smoke attempt. I'm going to try that coarse brush approach. So it's almost a black background. Here, I can get the camera up close so we can see. I'm shrinking it down so my coarse bristle brush is actually going to be very, very big. I'm making it a large brush while I'm at dinosaur size. So each of these bristles is going to be like a foot long. And I'm just going to quickly hash out a few in front and then more as it goes back. Just a couple. I'm not trying to paint it out entirely. Maybe at the bottom, I'll very much paint it out entirely. So with a black brush, I've already got that. Let's go back to human size. So he's starting to fade out. He's starting to disappear. The bristle brush strokes are still kind of noticeable, especially against the paler gray background, but now it is starting to obscure the body of the beast. Let's go in here a little bit more, add just a couple more strokes in a few places, and make sure the tail area is pretty well painted out. So even if we look at this picture from different angles, I want his body to be fairly obscured, but enough gentle strokes so that his body is sort of coming up out of it. Let's go back to normal human scale, just so we can see how his body is coming up out of that. Now when I start adding more of these blurring, blending effects, it helps him disappear a little more quickly, especially if I then start adding more things in the background. Maybe I'm going to keep using these dark colors to add other shapes, trees and buildings and things like that, so it's not just him back there. Now we'll grab a couple more of our coarse bristles, just to add that texture, add that pattern throughout these other places. Now the monster is starting to work with coming out of that background. Sure, he's still all silly, but now at least we can start to see how the shape is emerging from content, from an environment. Having it by itself is kind of tough, but as we add more pieces, it starts to obscure him. If we do go in with smoke, we need to be very sparing, because the more smoke you add, the more glowing it becomes. So I'm going to go up to my largest size, go up to the largest brush, and the darkest smoke I can get. Blackest black I can get. And I'm not going to do a lot. You can see how by doing this, it's almost highlighting some of the bristles. Let's see if I can get this where you can see it a little better. As I add the smoke in here, because it's a glow, it is highlighting some of my bristle effects. It is blending and blurring backgrounds, especially if I add more behind, give it 3 dimensions. You're not just stuck on this one plane, but maybe I'll do a few trailers of smoke up here. So now as we move around in the environment, he's a little more obscured, a little more blended. Especially if we give it an environment like a natural forest, or he's looming over a city, then we can actually use the coarse bristles to give it even more shape and definition. So if let's erase some of these, and I'm going to have this emerging from the trees. It'll be a nature scene. So let me get rid of some of these pieces. And I'm actually going to use a dark green and get a few general tree shapes going, just to give the impression of environment. Not enough to obscure, not enough to really become subjects of their own, but now it gives him a little bit more context of where we are and what's going on. When I switch to doing those coarse bristles, going back to my basic black, again, larger size, larger brush, but now if I give it the same type of direction, give it almost texture and pattern to the tree branches, it helps give him a little more context of where he's emerging from, what he's coming out of. A large part of what we're doing by hiding details is letting the viewer's imagination fill in what could be happening, what's going on here, giving it content and context. So now I'm going to go in a little bit more with the darkest smoke, not a lot, but just enough to get some blending, to get a little bit of depth and detail in here, hide some of the things that's going on behind it. Now it's starting to feel more like something coming out of the scenery. The fog, you can see, the more we paint, the paler it gets, but we're mostly using it to blend edges, to conceal details, to let the imagination fill in the rest of those details. This is something I'm doing in just a matter of minutes, but if you take full time, a good hour or two, you can really get this thing part of the environment, and it's the environment itself that's obscuring it. We don't need to artificially add too much, but we can have trees, smoke, that type of thing, just enough so that we got the impression. Now if I go back in, let's get him close here. Now if I take the time to add a lot of detail to the head, and not much detail to the rest, that's another visual cue for the viewer to have it coming forward, to have the rest of it a little more obscured. So this is what we're going for, an object partly obscured looming up out of the shadows. Part one is environment. Changing the lighting is going to have a huge effect on how this is perceived as well. Right now it's a very strong top light. So now that I've got the environment put in around it, I'm going to bring up our lighting menu. And we're going to see how changing the lighting, let's get a little closer so you can see this more clearly, affects the way we perceive this. So right now we've got a strong, by default, this environment has a strong pink top light and no real secondary light. You can see it's almost black coming up from underneath. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tint this a little bit darker, less light, but I'm also going to change its color. In most movies and theaters, blue lighting is for night. Greenish lighting gets unreal, alien, magical. So I'm going to tint this a little bit between blue and green and keep it fairly dark so there isn't a lot of light. Same with this fill light, the ambient light. There's still a lot of glow here. I'm going to turn the ambient light way down. Now we've got this thing in a much more darker environment, fewer details visible. Just that change in lighting has really made this from a happy Tiltosaurus to kind of creepy here. When we add the secondary light, we can do two different things with this. Thing number one, do we have a light source, maybe a campfire, something like that? In the lighting lesson, we were playing with our secondary light and drawing in fire to have it look reflected. We could use that effect here. Another effect we can do is the classic campfire, hold the flashlight under your face. If I add an underlight, so I'm going to actually turn the top light down a little bit, top light down a little bit, just enough so it's like starlight. But now I'm going to add the secondary light. We're going to give it a little bit more color, but we're again going to make it this creepy bluish green. Of course, Tiltosaurus is already green, so we'll do what we can. But now as I bring it up a little bit, and now I'm going to move it. So it's that slightly underlit. There, that's pretty good. That gives it a really eerie feeling. It's not quite glowing itself, but it's more of an environmental thing, a balance between the top light and dark and bottom light. I'm going to make my top light a little more blue, but also a little brighter. I'm going to make my bottom light, now this time I'm going to swing more into the purpley red. There, now it's getting really kind of eerie. So just the coloration. We want the whole thing to be dark, so I turned my fill light, the ambient light, way down. Bringing up a little bit of this underlighting really can give the whole painting a much more eerie, spooky effect. Keeping your colors dark and in the blue and green range, again, gives it both a night and a haunted feeling. The touch of green helps give it haunted. The other use we were saying for the secondary light, if I wanted to, I can actually go in, let's say I put in a little campfire down here. Make it nice, bright orange. We'll even add a couple of embers to it. But now I'm going to take this secondary lighting and give it that kind of orange. Now we've got this fire is lighting up the creature. You can see by the shadows, our primary starlight is still what's adding the light coming down on it, the main light and shadow. But now I'm using my secondary lighting to make this creature. So here I am, a nice little camper sitting at my campfire over here, and I've got this monster coming in out of the darkness. So it's a combination of using our organic brushes, not just smoke, but some of our pattern brushes to hide the body to help it to fade back. Smoke is more there to blur the details. Because it's adding light and adding color, we can't use the smoke itself to hide the body. We're using our patterns, especially if we can make the patterns match the environment, to mask the body. Then the smoke to blend it in and give us depth. So as we move away, you can see we've got many levels of smoke. If it was one continuous fog bank, it would get too bright. But you can see we've just got these walls and streamers, so it doesn't build up too quickly, but still gives us depth. Now we change the lighting to really make it that darker, more eerie feeling. Another good use of secondary lighting, if I was doing an interior like a haunted house, then we have our main ambient light from things like a chandelier or candelabra. Secondary lighting could be like a window. If I painted a moon in the window, we have the secondary light giving that glow. Or a fireplace giving the red glow from that. Do bear in mind, we cannot at this time do a spotlight. So if I actually wanted to have a light, the source right here, and everybody throwing shadows away from it, even painting a light looks like a light, but the light sources themselves are universal. Everything gets the same top light. Everything gets the same bottom light. So even if I painted something over here, its secondary lighting would be coming from underneath, not from the side like the fire. So this is sort of a way of playing with getting moody atmosphere, building up the environment to obscure your object and blending it in a little bit. The more you add, the less effective it's actually going to be, because especially with things like the smoke, we just get a bright glow. No matter how dark you make the color, it's just going to be a bright glowing smoke. So I'm going to leave this as my background. We're going to build that up and move them off to the side. So today's teaching tilt brush is how to truly bring out a dark, eerie atmosphere and try to have objects coming out of the darkness, even though when we paint, it's all about painting in light and color. I hope this was helpful. This, as I say, you can see was done in just 10-15 minutes. See what you can do in an hour or so. We're actually going to be doing that as part of this channel. We're actually going to be doing as part of our stream a full hour and a half, hour-long painting session, building up these kinds of images with these tools over time. They're going to be done live on Twitch. We're also going to be doing them archived on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/shamelessmayhem. But we're going to be having larger painting scales, partly because you guys have been asking for it, partly because now we have the time and the place set up so we can really bring you some beautiful pieces and talk about what we're doing as we're doing it. Let us know in the comments what you think, or if there's other things you want us to do. We have a lot of fun doing these things and don't intend on stopping anytime soon. But yeah, have fun, do some paintings, let me know how they turn out. Have fun with your tilting brush.